Here's a hypothetical question for you, my friend. Let's say you're doing a 5x5 on squats with 100 kilos. And next session, you are going up to 102.5 kilos. You have 5 options. Which is the best possible outcome? First, it is very, very easy. So that second workout where you went up in weight, it is much easier than before. It feels like a joke. The weight is light on your back. It's super easy. Everything is moving really, really well. There are no grindy reps or slow reps, and it's just a joke. Option 2, it is slightly easier than last time. It's still a little bit difficult. It's still a little bit of a challenge, but it's definitely noticeably easier despite going up in weight. Option 3, it is the same level of difficulty. No different despite going up in weight. Option 4, it is noticeably more difficult. The reps are a little bit slower. You feel a little bit more fatigued. It feels heavier on your back. The reps perhaps take a little bit longer, and it's definitely noticeably more challenging. Option 5, it is much more difficult than last time. It is literally harder than last time. It is a workout from hell, and you barely get through the workout. Which is the best possible outcome for that workout? I'll give you a few seconds.
Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Now, if you answered number 5, what is wrong with you?
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That means you got worse from the previous session. If you add only 2.5 kilos and it's way, way more difficult, it means you objectively got weaker. That's not a good outcome. That's the opposite of what you want happening. Even if you answered number 4 and it's more difficult, that's still not what you want. Heck, even if it's the same level of difficulty and you add 2.5 kilos, that means you did get better, but that's not as good as number 2. Number 2, you went up in weight and it's easier. In fact, I would say the best possible outcome is number 1. You go up in weight and it's much, much easier. The best possible outcome is literally training easier than last time. I know this flies in the face of almost every other content that I put out, so hear me out, because it makes sense if you watch the whole video. Now, some people might argue that if you have option 1, you should just go up more in weight. So if you add 2.5 kilos and it's still way easier than last time, you should just go up to 105 or 107.5 or 110 kilos to get where it's still more challenging. I would argue for strength, that is probably not the best idea. Even if you're only adding 2.5 kilos per week, in a year, that is 130 kilos, almost 300 pounds over the course of a year. So even if you push back that progression for a little bit later, it's still a very, very good outcome if you have the consistency and the patience. Eventually, on a linear progression like this, you will plateau. I promise you that. It is inevitable.
I know what it's like to lose.
But you want to push that plateau back. That wall that you're heading towards, you want to keep pushing it back. You don't want to run to it closer and then hit the wall. No, you want to be patient and progress as gradually and almost as slowly as possible.
Now, you hit that brick wall a little too quick. So with all progressions, it's really vital you back off far enough. Remember, give yourself that runway. Give yourself that runway to pick up momentum, so by the time you get into the weeds, you can push it a little bit farther. If you're hitting a brick wall week 1, week 2, you're really not going to get anywhere.
This is where RPE and fatigue management come into play. As Jonnie Candito says, the greatest benefit of RPE is fatigue management.
Because the biggest benefit of RPE, in my opinion, is fatigue management.
And that's why powerlifters tend to use RPE way more than people who are physique focused, who are focused on building size, on hypertrophy. If you go into a workout as a bodybuilder and you're fatigued and your performance is the same or perhaps even down a little bit, that's not the end of the world. But for a strength athlete, strength is the goal, and therefore progression is very, very important. And I look at it like this. You know that old helicopter game where it's a simple flash game, and if you push the mouse, the helicopter on the screen goes up, and if you don't push the mouse, it falls? Pretty simple game, right? If you go too high, you push that mouse button, you just push, you catapult into the ceiling and you die. If you don't push it at all, you just fall to the ground and you also die. And we can view this as RPE. The top is RPE 10. If you're always getting these grindy, all-out, super slow reps, you're gonna go nowhere. I absolutely promise you that because I've experienced it a bunch of times. Always training to failure or near failure on the big lifts is a good way to stall really, really fast. On the other hand, if you are completely pussyfooting your training and you're just, keeping 15 reps in reserve, you're doing triples with like 40% of your max, that's not going to get you anywhere. You need to be in a range of RPE. I would say for most people, anywhere between RPE 2 to 3 up until 7 or 8. Maybe 9 at times, but most of the time for strength, you want to keep a couple or perhaps even more reps in the tank. You're in this upward channel of progression. If you push too high, too heavy of weights, too close to failure, that will actually slow your progression due to excess fatigue.
Almost every top level lifter, from what I've seen, really underrates the RPE on their volume work.
Jonnie is completely right in that a lot of powerlifters keep a lot of reps in the tank, perhaps more than they actually think. So they might say it's an RPE 8. Well, it looks more like an RPE 6 or 5 or 4. And this is very, very common in powerlifting. You keep your grindy, all-out third attempts for a competition.
Hey guys, Editor Geoff here. I thought I would chuck in a few examples. Here is Yuri Belkin doing a 200 kilo for one bench press, and someone in the comments said, oh, you could have done it for a double. Yeah, he could have. He just didn't. Here he is squatting, high bar, 200 kilos for 6, and this is very, very easy. His squat PR is 420 kilos. So this is less than 50% of his max. I mean, even, it's a high bar versus low bar, but still you can tell it's very sub-maximal. Here is a 160 kilo bench for 3, and you can see it's very, very easy. He's focusing on his technique, but it's very explosive and it is nowhere near failure. And yet he is one of the greatest lifters of all time. Here's Jamal doing some deadlifts, and again, a bunch of reps in the tank. Like lots and lots of reps in the tank, and he's still getting a lot out of it because he doesn't have to train to failure to get some benefit from the set.
This is because you don't get that much out of the grindy reps, and yet they have a huge fatigue cost. And this is more true the stronger you get. So most really, really strong people, they are very, very mindful of those grindy reps. So I'll put a list of pros and cons on the screen. What are the pros of these grindy reps? So if you're doing a set of 6 and that last 6th rep, what are you actually getting out of that? Well, you are learning how to grind.
That's disgusting. What are they doing? Are they doing what I think they're doing?
They're all doing the same bump and grind thing. Get out of here. Okay. Oh, better. Oh, I like that. There they go.
Is this supposed to be attractive?
This is a very useful skill, but once you have that skill, you no longer have to practice it, especially at a given lift. Once you've had a few 6, 7, 8 second deadlifts or squats or bench presses under your belt, you no longer really have to do that, and you probably shouldn't. Next, you know you're getting all-out maximum motor unit recruitment. But if you're working with even moderate weights and you're really focusing on moving explosively and aggressively on that concentric, you should be getting that anyway. It should be very, very close, if not already there, to maximum motor unit recruitment, even if the bar speed is still quite healthy. Next, it might produce extra time under tension, or perhaps there's some minor stimulus from the muscle damage, but I would say probably not a huge benefit. And honestly, this is probably more of a drawback than anything. Anyone who is like, muscle damage causes muscle growth, they're not actually up to date with the research. And as for the negatives, well, you're causing excess fatigue. So those first few reps, you're getting a lot of benefit and not that much fatigue. For the later reps, you're still getting a good amount of benefit from a strength perspective. Hypertrophy is a little bit different, but the fatigue is going up non-linearly. It's going up exponentially, for sure. And this can impact your recovery time. Studies repeatedly show the closer you train to failure, the longer it takes to recover. You can also develop imbalances and or compensations. So when you are close to failure and you're getting those grindy reps, this exposes your weaknesses. Now, this is a good thing if you need to know your weaknesses, but if you already know them, this is probably not a great thing. If your knees are caving in, if your hips are shooting back in the squat, in the deadlift, if you're getting excessively rounded over, in the bench press, if your elbows are flaring out more than they should for you, probably not a good thing. And it's very hard to practice your technique with truly maximal weights or maximal efforts. It's better to keep a few reps in the tank. You can do more work, you can do more sets, fatigue is lower, you can train more frequently, and you can actually focus on having a consistent and efficient technique. There's also a mental and possibly a hormonal difference in these sets that are close to failure or using weights that you have to psych yourself up for. Higher adrenaline, higher cortisol, impacted recovery. Okay, so yes, an all-out set of squats might spike your testosterone, spike your GH, but you're also spiking catabolic hormones, which is probably not good for recovery and for long-term progression. Plus, mentally, these grindy reps absolutely take things out of you. Also, soreness. If you're doing triples with something you could do for sets of 6 or 7 or 8, you probably won't get sore from that unless you're completely new to the movement. But if you're taking these sets to true RPE 8, 9, 10, you're pushing way closer to failure, you're getting these grindy reps, you're going to be sore, you're going to be more beaten up, and I would say possibly your acute risk of injury also goes up as well. I don't have any scientific data to support that because they haven't actually studied it as far as I know. Be a pretty messed up study. But I would say training to failure constantly on the main lifts probably does increase your risk of injury. It's not super high, but it probably does.
But that relies on the underpinning idea that undershooting is better than overshooting. And the reason why I believe that is because if you undershoot, you can just extend a cycle, assuming you're still adding weight. Now, if you're literally not progressively overloading, that is a different issue. That can be a problem. But if you're adding even 5 pounds, and then now it's just very clear that your potential max is rising, you can just add another week. Whereas if you overshoot, you can't just move your peak up a week. It does not work that way. Good God, you could try to make that work. It would not.
And I agree with Jonnie Candito in that for strength training, probably not for hypertrophy training, but for strength training for sure, it's better to undershoot your RPE than overshoot your RPE. If you undershoot, well, you can just go up next week. You can just prolong your training cycle and keep going that way. If you overshoot, you might peak early, you might get beaten up, you might get injured. Like there's lots of negatives from going too close to failure too often. So I would say if in doubt, it's better to keep a rep or two in the tank.
Get to the chopper!
Time to pick up the tempo, boys.
Screw your freedom.
Not good.
It's also worth noting that a lot of people, even high-level powerlifters, are likely overestimating their RPE. So they say that's an RPE 8 or 9, meaning they had 1 or 2 reps in the tank, but they actually probably had more. That doesn't mean they're training improperly or incorrectly. It just means that having more reps in the tank than most people think can still be highly effective for strength training. And this is one of the main differences between training for strength and training for size. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but this is one of the bigger ones. When training for hypertrophy, you probably want to be closer to failure than when training for strength. And this is part of the reason why people have accessory movements. You avoid failure on the big three, and then you use accessories in order to get that other stimulus. This is part of the reason why Louis Simmons advocated training at 90%. Now, I don't agree with everything Louis Simmons puts out by any means, but I think he's right in this regard. Doing a heavy single at 90% gets you basically all the benefits of a heavy single at 100% with way less fatigue. A heavy single at 90%, the concentric might take a couple of seconds, most likely. A heavy single at 100%, we're talking 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds in some cases. And you get a whole bunch more fatigue, joint stress, adrenaline, everything associated with that, which just takes longer time to recover. So it's a pretty clear choice when you actually look at it objectively and you take the ego out of it, which is often hard to do. And if you look at the old Soviet way of weightlifting, the majority of lifts were between 70 and 85%. A few under 70%, but not many over 90%. Only 5% of lifts were over 90%. They just didn't need to touch those very heavy weights very often to keep that skill. They spent most of the time building their strength, not testing their strength. And I think that's the way to go. Keeping a lot of reps in the tank, just doing more sets and practicing, doing higher frequency and keeping fatigue as low as possible. There was some old Soviet lifter, I forget exactly which one, it might have been Taranenko, but he said, train as frequently as possible, as heavy as possible, while remaining as fresh as possible. And this is only possible if you are keeping reps in the tank. And I'm not saying to not put effort into your training, but perhaps keeping a few extra reps in the tank could result in better results. Good sentence, buddy. All right, that's all for this video. Like, subscribe, share, notifications turned on, all the good stuff if you want to. I mean, I'm not like pressuring you or anything, but I will see you in the next video. Peace.